I'm Colonel Kayla Drake, 41 years old, born into the Corps, raised on discipline, and forged by combat. I lost my left leg in Helix Point, but I came back stronger, promoted, and still leading Marines. For years, I gave everything to this uniform: time, loyalty, and pieces of myself I'll never get back. But one night at a bar near Pendleton, a group of Marines saw the prosthetic before the rank and decided to laugh. That's when I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been undervalued, mocked, or humiliated by people who should have known better? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from, and if you've ever had to stand your ground after being disrespected. Hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about earning respect, setting boundaries, and reclaiming your worth. What happened next might surprise you. I was born into service. My father, Master Gunnery Sergeant Lucas Dre, raised me on discipline. My mother, Commander Alara Kane, served as a Navy trauma nurse. I joined the Corps at 18 and climbed from second lieutenant to lieutenant colonel before my 40th birthday. In Reaper Squadron, we handled deep strike coordination, missions where timing meant survival. During Operation Helix Point, I lost my left leg shielding my team from indirect fire. The prosthetic came later, the rank I kept earning. I poured everything into the uniform: time, loyalty, even family ties that couldn't survive the tempo. What I got in return wasn't always respect, but the Corps had taught me something harder than combat: endurance. My father died when I was 26, killed in a training accident at 29 Palms. My mother attended the funeral in full dress blues, stood through the entire ceremony without crying, then drove home and didn't speak for 3 days. I learned then that grief in a military family isn't performed, it's stored, cataloged, filed away until there's time to process it. There never is. By the time I made captain at 28, I'd deployed 4 times. Iraq twice, Afghanistan once, and a classified op in the Horn of Africa that I still can't discuss. I came back from each one a little harder, a little more efficient, a little less interested in small talk. The other officers noticed. Some respected it. Others thought I was cold. I didn't care which. I had a job to do. Operation Helix Point happened when I was 37. We were coordinating air support for a ground element that had gotten pinned down in a valley outside Sanjin. The enemy had overwatch positions on 3 sides, and our pilots needed precise targeting data to avoid hitting friendly forces. I was running comms from a forward position when the first mortar round hit. I don't remember the explosion itself. I remember the sound before it, a whistle, high and thin, like a tea kettle. Then I remember waking up with Gunnery Sergeant Aiden Core's face above mine, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. Later he told me I'd pushed Lieutenant Rin Avers out of the impact zone half a second before the round landed. She walked away with a concussion and shrapnel in her shoulder. I lost my left leg below the knee. The doctors at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center told me I was lucky. The blast had been clean, no bone fragments, no secondary injuries. The prosthetic would fit well, they said. I could expect to regain 70 to 80% of my previous mobility within a year. I asked them when I could return to duty. They looked at each other. One of them, a major with kind eyes, said, "Colonel, you need to focus on recovery first." I said, "When can I return to duty?" 6 months later, I was back at Pendleton, promoted to lieutenant colonel, and assigned to a new role coordinating joint operations training. The prosthetic was carbon fiber, fitted with a hydraulic ankle joint that adjusted to terrain. It cost more than my first car. I named it Otto, after my high school physics teacher who used to say that persistence beats talent 9 times out of 10. The younger Marines stared. Not all of them, and not always obviously, but I caught it. The quick glances at my leg during formations, the way conversations would pause when I walked into a room. Most of them had never served with an amputee officer before. They didn't know how to act. I didn't help them figure it out. I ran my 5 miles every morning, same as before. I passed my combat fitness test with scores that would have embarrassed half the able-bodied officers on base. I showed up early and left late and expected the same from everyone under my command. If they had questions, they could ask. Nobody did. My mother visited once during recovery. She walked into my quarters at Pendleton, looked at the prosthetic leaning against the wall, and said, "Your father would have made a joke about it." "I know," I said. "He would have called it your spare part." "I know." She sat down across from me. "Are you okay, Kayla?" I considered the question. I was alive. I was still serving. I had a roof over my head and a mission to complete. By most measures, I was fine. "Yes," I said. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. She'd been a trauma nurse for 30 years. She knew when someone wasn't ready to talk. What I didn't tell her was that the injury had changed something fundamental. Not my ability to serve, that was intact. Not my commitment, that had only deepened. It was my relationship with the Corps itself. Before Helix Point, I'd believed that excellence and sacrifice would always be rewarded with respect. After, I understood that respect was conditional, performance-based, and could evaporate the moment you stopped looking like what a Marine was supposed to look like. I'd earned my rank. I'd earned my position. But some people would only ever see the prosthetic. Lieutenant Rinevers became my operations officer 6 months after I returned. She requested the assignment specifically. When I asked her why, she said, "Because you saved my life, ma'am, and I'd like to return the favor by making your job easier." I told her that wasn't necessary. She said, with respect, "Colonel, I'm not asking for permission." She was 28, sharp as a blade, and had a gift for logistics that bordered on precognition. Within 2 weeks, she'd reorganized my entire schedule, streamlined the training coordination process, and identified 3 bottlenecks in our supply chain that had been costing us time and resources for months. I asked her why she hadn't been promoted yet. "I punched a staff sergeant who made a pass at me during a field exercise," she said. "It's in my file." "Did you break anything?" "His nose." "Good," I said. "I'll see about getting you promoted." She smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her do it. "Respectfully, ma'am, I'd rather you didn't. I like where I am." She was lying, but I let it go. Some battles you fight later. Gunnery Sergeant Adencourt transferred to my unit around the same time. He'd been at Helix Point, had been one of the Marines who carried me to the medevac, and had spent the last 2 years training new recruits at Paris Island. He was 37, built like a tank, and had a reputation for being impossible to rattle. The first time we spoke after his transfer, he said, "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" "Granted." "I'm glad you're still here." I nodded. "Me too, Gunny." That was the extent of it. We didn't need more. The 3 of us formed the core of what would eventually become Project Reaper, though we didn't know it yet. At the time, we were just trying to do our jobs in an environment that was changing faster than any of us could adapt to. The core was different now. Younger. Louder. More concerned with image than substance. Social media had invaded everything. Marines posting workout videos, deployment photos, motivational quotes over pictures of sunsets and helicopters. The line between service and performance had blurred. I didn't understand it. I didn't need to. My job was to train them, not to like them. But I was starting to realize that the respect I'd taken for granted, earned through years of service, sacrifice, and competence, wasn't automatic anymore. It had to be defended, constantly, against a generation that measured value differently. I should have seen the warning signs earlier. I didn't. Rehabilitation changed me, but the Corps had changed too. Younger NCOs, men who'd grown up on deployment videos and bravado, measured worth by muscle, not record. A staff sergeant named Caldervoss led the Snickers during drills. He called me paper brass under his breath. I let it pass. Authority doesn't argue. But it built up. The first time I heard it, I was walking past the motor pool. Voss was with 3 other Marines, all of them E5 and below, all of them looking like they'd stepped out of a recruiting poster. Young, fit, confident in the way only people who haven't been tested yet can be. "Paper brass," Voss said, "just loud enough to carry. All rank, no spine." The others laughed. Not loud, just enough to show solidarity. I kept walking. Correcting him would have given the comment weight it didn't deserve. But I filed it away, the way you catalog enemy positions during reconnaissance. Information to be used later. Lieutenant Avers noticed. She always noticed. "You want me to handle that, ma'am?" she asked when we were back in the office. "Handle what?" Staff Sergeant Voss. The disrespect. I looked up from the training schedule I'd been reviewing. Did you hear him say something disrespectful? No, ma'am. But I heard what he didn't say loud enough for you to officially hear. I smiled despite myself. Then there's nothing to handle. She didn't look satisfied, but she let it drop. The problem wasn't Voss alone. He was a symptom, not the disease. The real issue was cultural, a shift in how the younger enlisted viewed leadership. They'd grown up in the era of social media, where authority could be questioned publicly, where respect was something you performed for likes and shares rather than something you earned through action. They didn't understand that the Corps wasn't a democracy. It was a meritocracy, and merit was measured in blood, sweat, and results, not in how many people thought you were cool. Captain Rhett Marlowe arrived at Pendleton 3 months after Voss's comment. He was 34, newly promoted, and charismatic in the worst possible way. The kind of officer who made you laugh at his jokes even when they weren't funny, who could walk into a room and own it within 30 seconds, who inspired loyalty through personality rather than competence. He was dangerous. I recognized it immediately, but recognizing a problem and solving it are two different things. Marlowe was popular. The junior officers loved him. The enlisted worshipped him. And he was technically proficient enough that I couldn't fault his work. But he fed the culture, the performance, the bravado, the idea that being a Marine was about image rather than substance. He posted photos on social media, ran unofficial PT sessions that looked more like CrossFit demonstrations than training, and had a way of making every conversation feel like you were either in his inner circle or outside it. He turned the younger ranks into an audience. And audiences don't think critically, they applaud. I watched him during a company formation one morning. He was giving a brief on an upcoming field exercise, and he had the Marines eating out of his hand jokes, stories, a casual confidence that made military discipline feel almost optional. When he finished, the applause was louder than it should have been. Gunnery Sergeant Corr stood beside me, his face unreadable. When the formation dismissed, he said quietly, "That's going to be a problem, ma'am." "I know. What do you want to do about it?" I thought about it. Marlowe hadn't done anything explicitly wrong. He was popular, yes, but popularity isn't a crime. He was bending the culture, but he hadn't broken it. Nothing, I said. Yet? By the time I noticed how far things had slipped, respect had turned into performance. The younger Marines weren't following orders because they understood the purpose. They were following orders because Marlowe made it look cool. And when he wasn't around, the orders stopped mattering. Voss became bolder. He started making comments during training sessions, not directly to me, but loud enough for others to hear. "Old guard leadership," he said once, after I'd corrected his squad's formation. "Different era, different standards." Lieutenant Avers stepped forward before I could respond. "Staff Sergeant, you have something to say to the Colonel?" Voss snapped to attention, his face carefully neutral. "No, ma'am." "Then I suggest you focus on your job instead of providing commentary." "Yes, ma'am." After the drill ended, Avers found me in my office. "Ma'am, with respect, you need to shut that down." "I will. When it's time." "When is it time?" I looked at her. She was frustrated, protective, and she didn't understand why I wasn't responding more aggressively. I didn't blame her. But she was 28, and she hadn't learned yet that some battles are won by waiting. "When they cross a line that can't be walked back," I said. She didn't look satisfied, but she trusted me enough to let it go. The line came 2 weeks later. I was running morning PT with my command staff 5 miles through the base, same route I'd been running since I returned from medical leave. My pace was steady, my prosthetic functioning perfectly, and I was in the middle of the pack where I preferred to be. We rounded the corner past the barracks, and there was Voss with his squad, finishing their own PT session. They stopped to watch us pass, and I heard one of them mutter something. Laughter followed. I didn't break stride. But Gunnery Sergeant Corr, who'd been running beside me, slowed and turned. "Something funny, Marines?" They snapped to attention. "No, Gunnery Sergeant." Corr held their eyes for a long moment, then jogged to catch up with me. "You hear what they said, ma'am?" "No." "Good." But I had heard it. Not the words, those had been too quiet, but the tone. Mockery. Contempt. The kind of laughter that strips away rank and uniform and reduces you to a punchline. I'd heard it before in different contexts, different situations. It never got easier. That afternoon, Captain Marlowe stopped by my office. He knocked, waited for permission to enter, then stood at ease in front of my desk. "Colonel, I wanted to talk to you about morale." I set down the report I'd been reading. "Go ahead." "Some of the junior enlisted are expressing concerns about leadership style. They feel like the training environment is too rigid, too focused on traditional methods." "Traditional methods," I repeated. "Yes, ma'am." "They're wondering if there's room for innovation, for adapting to the current generation of Marines." I leaned back in my chair. "Captain Marlowe, are you suggesting that discipline and standards are outdated?" "No, ma'am. I'm suggesting that different approaches might be more effective with younger personnel." "And you believe your approach is more effective?" He smiled, easy, confident. "I believe results speak for themselves, ma'am. My Marines are motivated, engaged, and performing well." I looked at him for a long moment. He was telling me, in the politest possible terms, that his way was better. That my way, the traditional, rigid, old-guard way, was the problem. "Captain, your Marines perform well when you're watching. When you're not, they perform for the audience. That's not discipline. That's theater." His smile didn't falter, but something shifted behind his eyes. "With respect, ma'am, I disagree." "You're entitled to disagree, Captain. You're not entitled to undermine the command structure by turning leadership into a popularity contest." Now the smile disappeared. "I've done no such thing." "Dismissed, Captain." He stood, saluted, and left. The door closed with a careful, controlled sound. Lieutenant Avers appeared 30 seconds later. "He's going to be a problem." "He already is," I said. But I still didn't know how much of one. Not yet. By the time I noticed, respect had turned to performance. The younger ranks had become an audience, and I was no longer directing them. I was competing for their attention against someone who'd made leadership look effortless and fun. I'd earned my rank through sacrifice. Marlowe had earned his following through charisma. And in that moment, I wasn't sure which one mattered more. Off-base bar, Friday night. I was incognito, hoodie pulled low, just another Marine nursing a soda. Then came the voices, Voss and two corporals. "Missing something, sweetheart?" one said, "I'm the prosthetic." Laughter. A flick of contempt in their tone, more cutting than the words. I didn't reply. Silence is heavier than anger. The bar was called Murphy's, a dive 3 miles from Pendleton that catered to junior enlisted and locals who didn't mind the noise. I'd gone there specifically because it was off-base, because I wouldn't be recognized, because I needed 1 hour where I wasn't Colonel Kane, where I could sit in a corner booth and pretend I was just another veteran trying to decompress. I should have known better. I'd chosen a seat near the back, away from the main crowd, with my prosthetic visible because hiding it felt like shame, and I'd promised myself I wouldn't be ashamed. The hoodie was civilian, the jeans were old, and I'd left my ID in the car. Anonymous. Invisible. For 30 minutes, it worked. Then Voss walked in with Corporal Hayes and Corporal Dennison, both of them young, both of them loud, all 3 of them looking like they'd already had a few drinks somewhere else. They didn't see me at first. They headed straight for the bar, ordered a round, and started talking at a volume that suggested they wanted to be heard. I considered leaving. I should have left. But leaving felt like retreat, and I'd spent 2 decades refusing to retreat from anything. So I stayed, kept my head down, and focused on my soda. 10 minutes later, Voss spotted me. I saw the recognition in his eyes the moment he processed the prosthetic, then the face, then the realization that I was out of uniform and therefore, in his mind, out of authority. He said something to Hayes and Dennison. They both turned to look. Then they walked over. Voss stopped at the edge of my booth, drink in hand, that same easy smile he wore during formations when he thought I wasn't watching. "Evening," he said. I nodded. Didn't speak. "You come here often?" Hayes asked. He was 23, from Georgia, with the kind of accent that made every sentence sound friendly even when it wasn't. "No." "First time?" "Yes." Dennison leaned against the booth. He was shorter than the others, built like a wrestler, with a shaved head and a tattoo creeping up his neck. Rough week. I looked at him. Something like that. Yeah, we've all had those. He glanced at my prosthetic, then back at my face. Looks like yours was rougher than most. The other two laughed, not loud, not mean, just enough to establish that this was a joke, that I was supposed to play along, that we were all friends here. I didn't respond. Voss took a sip of his beer. Missing something, sweetheart? The words hung in the air. Not shouted. Not aggressive. Just casual, conversational, the kind of comment you could explain away later as a misunderstanding, as friendly banter, as nothing at all. But it was something. It was everything. I looked at him. He held my gaze, still smiling, waiting for a reaction. Hayes and Dennison watched. The bartender, a civilian named Jesse Morn, mid-40s, with tired eyes, glanced over but didn't intervene. I could have responded a dozen different ways. I could have pulled rank, even out of uniform. I could have told them exactly who I was and watched the color drain from their faces. I could have stood up and left, taken the high road, been the bigger person. Instead, I said nothing. Silence is heavier than anger. It sits in the space where words should be and forces everyone to sit with it, to feel the weight of what they've done without the relief of confrontation. Voss's smile faltered. Just slightly. Just enough. Hey, no offense, he said. Just making conversation. I took a sip of my soda. Still didn't speak. Hayes shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, we didn't mean anything by it. Dennison looked between them, suddenly less confident. We should probably sit down, Marines. The voice came from behind them. Deep, authoritative, with the kind of command presence that makes people obey before they've processed who's speaking. All three of them turned. Major General Silas Curran stood in the doorway, backlit by the streetlights outside, his uniform immaculate despite the late hour. He was 58, with silver hair-cut military short and a chest full of medals that included 2 silver stars and a Navy Cross. He commanded a Marine Expeditionary Force, which meant he commanded nearly every Marine on this base, including me. The bar went quiet. Curran walked forward, his eyes locked on Voss, Hayes, and Dennison. They stood frozen, caught between instinct and disbelief, trying to figure out if this was real or some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Then Curran's eyes shifted to me. His expression changed to recognition, then something else. Respect. Concern. The kind of look you give someone who's been through hell and doesn't deserve to go through it again. Ma'am, he said. Reaper Zero? You could have heard a pin drop. I stood slowly, setting my soda down with careful precision. My prosthetic made a soft hydraulic sound as I shifted my weight. The hoodie suddenly felt absurd, a costume I'd worn to pretend I was someone I wasn't. Yes, sir. Curran snapped to attention. His salute was crisp, perfect, exactly regulation. Permission to approach, Colonel. Behind him, Voss, Hayes, and Dennison looked like they'd been hit with a stun grenade. Their faces had gone pale. Hayes's mouth was open. Dennison had taken an involuntary step backward. Voss looked like he might throw up. I returned the salute. Permission granted, sir. Curran stepped forward, his voice dropping to something almost conversational, but still carrying that edge of command. I apologize, Colonel. I wasn't aware you'd be here tonight, or I would have ensured your privacy was respected. No apology necessary, sir. I was just leaving. He glanced at the 3 Marines, then back at me. I see. Would you like me to arrange transportation? I have my car, sir. But thank you. He nodded, then looked past me at Voss. His expression hardened. Staff Sergeant Voss. Corporal Hayes. Corporal Dennison. You 3 will report to my office at 0800 tomorrow morning. Dress blues. Do you understand? Yes, sir, they said in unison. Their voices cracked. Good. Now get out of my sight. They moved like their lives depended on it, fast, stumbling, nearly colliding with each other in their rush to reach the door. Within 10 seconds, they were gone. The bar stayed quiet for another moment, then slowly the conversations resumed. People turned back to their drinks. The bartender exhaled. Curran looked at me. Colonel, I meant what I said. I apologize. This shouldn't have happened. It's not your fault, sir. Maybe not. But it's my command, and that makes it my responsibility. He paused. Are you all right? The question caught me off guard. Not because it was inappropriate. Karan was a good officer, a decent man, someone who genuinely cared about the Marines under his command. But because I hadn't expected anyone to ask. I'm fine, sir. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good. I'll see you Monday, Colonel. Yes, sir. He saluted again. I returned it. Then he turned and walked out, leaving me standing in the middle of Murphy's with my soda and my hoodie and the sudden, overwhelming weight of what had just happened. The bartender approached. You good? Yeah. That really the general? Yes. He whistled softly. Those boys are in deep trouble. They are. He started to say something else, then thought better of it and walked back to the bar. I sat down, finished my soda, pulled cash from my pocket and left it on the table, more than enough to cover the drink and a tip. Then I walked out into the night, got in my car, and drove back to base. My hands didn't shake until I was alone. Word spread through Pendleton overnight. The same Marines who laughed at me now stood in front of the general's desk. Article 15. Formal apologies. Karan found me afterward. You shouldn't have to bleed twice for respect, he said. I smiled faintly. They're Marines, sir. They'll remember this longer than a lecture. Still, that night hit harder than I'd expected. Not the insult, the proof that to some, a scar meant weakness unless validated by power. That was the wound I couldn't patch. The news traveled faster than I expected. By Saturday morning, Lieutenant Avers had called me 3 times. I didn't answer. By Saturday afternoon, Gunnery Sergeant Corr had shown up at my quarters with coffee and that look he got when he was worried, but trying not to show it. You good, ma'am? He asked. I'm fine, Gunny. He handed me the coffee. That's not what I asked. I took the cup. I know. He stood there for a moment, waiting to see if I'd say more. When I didn't, he nodded and left. Corr understood silence better than most people understood words. By Sunday, the entire base knew. Not the official version. That would come Monday during the general's call with Voss, Hayes, and Dennison, but the story. The bar. The comment. The moment Karan walked in, and everything changed. I heard it from 3 different sources before noon. Each version was slightly different, slightly more dramatic, slightly more mythologized. By the 3rd telling, Karan had supposedly dressed them down in the middle of the bar, in front of everyone, with language that would have made a drill instructor blush. That wasn't what happened. But truth and myth occupied different territories in military culture, and myth always wins. Monday morning at 07:30, I was in my office reviewing training schedules when Lieutenant Avers knocked. Come in. She entered, closed the door, and stood at attention. Ma'am, I heard about what happened. I assumed you would. Permission to speak freely? Granted. She relaxed slightly. Are you okay? It was the 2nd time someone had asked me that question in 3 days. I still didn't have a good answer. Yes. That's not what I meant, ma'am. I set down my pen. I know what you meant, Lieutenant. And the answer is still yes. I'm okay. This isn't the first time someone's made a comment about my prosthetic, and it won't be the last. What happened at the bar was unfortunate, but it's being handled. It shouldn't have happened at all. No, it shouldn't have. But it did, and now we deal with the consequences. She looked like she wanted to say more, but wasn't sure how. Finally, she said, I'm glad the general was there. So am I. She nodded, still uncertain. Is there anything you need, ma'am? Just business as usual, Lieutenant. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. Yes, ma'am. After she left, I sat alone in my office and tried to focus on work. The training schedules needed review. The quarterly reports needed signatures. The next month's operational calendar needed approval. But my mind kept returning to the bar. Not to the comment. I'd already processed that, filed it away with all the other comments I'd heard over the years. What I couldn't stop thinking about was the moment Karan walked in. The look on Voss's face. The sudden, absolute understanding of what he'd done and who he'd done it to. The shift from mockery to terror in less than 5 seconds. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt hollow. I'd spent 22 years earning respect through action. Through competence. Through sacrifice. And in the end, it took a general walking into a bar to make 3 Marines understand that I deserved it. That wasn't right. but I didn't know how to fix it. At 0800, Major General Karan called Voss, Hayes, and Dennison into his office. I wasn't there. This wasn't my disciplinary action to oversee, but Gunnery Sergeant Core was, and he briefed me afterward. How'd it go, Gunny? About as well as you'd expect, ma'am. Voss looked like he was going to pass out. Hayes cried. Dennison tried to explain himself, and the general shut him down in about 3 seconds. Article 15s? All 3. Loss of rank for Voss, he's a corporal now. 45 days restriction for Hayes and Dennison, plus forfeiture of half pay for 2 months. I nodded. It was harsh, but fair. Probably harsher than it would have been if the target had been anyone else, but Karan had made it clear that disrespecting a field-grade officer, especially one who'd lost a limb in combat, was career-limiting behavior. Did they apologize? I asked. They asked if they could, ma'am. The general told them that would be your decision. I thought about it. An apology from Voss would be meaningless, words forced by fear, not understanding. Hayes and Dennison were younger, less entrenched in their contempt. They might mean it, but I didn't need their apologies. I needed them to be better Marines. Tell them apologies aren't necessary. Tell them I expect professional conduct moving forward, and if they can demonstrate that, we'll consider this matter closed. Yes, ma'am. Core left, and I went back to work. Or tried to. The day dragged. Meetings blurred together. By 1600, I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. At 1730, after most of the command staff had left for the day, Karan knocked on my door. Come in, sir. He entered, closed the door, and sat down across from my desk without being invited. It was a breach of protocol. I was the subordinate officer. He shouldn't have sat first, but Karan had never been much for protocol when it interfered with being human. Kayla, he said, using my first name, which he only did in private. Talk to me. I set down the report I'd been pretending to read. There's nothing to talk about, sir. I don't believe that. With respect, sir, my beliefs aren't subject to your approval. He smiled faintly. Fair enough. But I'm going to say something anyway, and you're going to listen, because I outrank you and because I've known you long enough to know when you're lying to yourself. I waited. You shouldn't have to bleed twice for respect, he said. But you did. And that's not fair, and it's not right, and it's sure as hell not what you signed up for when you joined this corps. But it happened. And now you have a choice. You can let it break you, or you can use it to change things. I'm not broken, sir. I didn't say you were. But that night hit harder than you're admitting, and if you don't deal with it now, it's going to fester. I looked at him. Karan had commanded Marines for 35 years. He'd been shot twice, blown up once, and lost more Marines than he could count. He understood wounds, visible and otherwise. What do you suggest I do, sir? I suggest you stop pretending this is about 3 idiots in a bar. It's not. It's about a culture that's shifted, about younger Marines who don't understand what leadership looks like, about a gap between the old guard and the new generation that's getting wider every year. And how do I fix that? By building a bridge. By showing them what right looks like. By taking every Marine who thinks a prosthetic means weakness and proving them wrong so thoroughly they never make that mistake again. I considered his words. He wasn't wrong. The problem was bigger than Voss. Bigger than Marlowe, bigger than one incident in one bar. It was systemic, cultural, and it would take more than discipline to solve. That sounds like a long-term project, sir. It is. But you're good at long-term projects. And you're not doing it alone. Who's helping? He smiled. Me, for starters. Gunnery Sergeant Corps. Lieutenant Evers. Every Marine in this command who understands what you represent and what you've sacrificed. We're not letting you fight this by yourself. I felt something shift in my chest, not relief exactly, but something close to it. The weight I'd been carrying since Friday night didn't disappear, but it felt less heavy. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll think about what I said. I will. He stood, saluted, and left. I sat alone in my office for another hour thinking. About the bar. About Voss. About Marlowe and the culture he represented. About 22 years of service and what it had cost me and what I'd gained in return. By the time I left, I'd made a decision. I was going to build something. Not just for me. For every Marine who'd been told they were broken, who'd been mocked for their scars, who'd sacrificed everything and been treated like they'd lost their value. I was going to show them what redemption looked like. And I was going to start with the Marines who needed it most. I drafted a proposal for Project Reaper, a mentorship and tactical leadership initiative for wounded and recovering Marines. Real operations, not therapy sessions. Coron signed off within the week. Marlowe protested, claiming optics mattered. I looked at him across the table. So does survival, Captain. By quarter's end, Coron had reassigned him to a staff billet in logistics, quietly, permanently. The proposal took 3 days to write. I started with the mission statement, to integrate combat-experienced Marines with service-connected injuries back into operational leadership roles through focused mentorship, tactical training, and real-world mission planning. No medical boards. No pity. No assumption that injury meant the end of usefulness. Just work. Lieutenant Avers helped with the logistics section. Gunnery Sergeant Corps contributed the training curriculum. By the time I submitted it to Major General Coron's office, the document was 60 pages long, meticulously sourced, and comprehensive enough to survive any scrutiny. I expected questions. I expected pushback. I expected months of review and revision before anything happened. Coron called me into his office 4 days later. "Sit down, Colonel." I sat. He had the proposal open on his desk, annotated with his own notes, several sections highlighted. "This is good work." "Thank you, sir." "It's also ambitious. You're talking about integrating wounded Marines back into tactical command positions, which means convincing the medical community that they're fit for duty, convincing the operational community that they're worth the investment, and convincing the wounded Marines themselves that they still have something to contribute." "Yes, sir. That's 3 separate battles, all of them uphill." "I'm aware, sir." He leaned back in his chair. "You know why I'm approving this? Because it's the right thing to do, sir? Partially. But mostly because you're living proof it works. You lost your leg, came back, and you're one of the best officers in my command. If you can do it, others can too. And if we don't give them the chance, we're wasting resources and betraying the people who've already given everything." He picked up a pen and signed the approval line at the bottom of the first page. "You have 6 months to run a pilot program. I'm giving you authority to recruit participants, access to training facilities at Lejeune and Quantico, and a modest budget for equipment and support staff. If it works, we expand it. If it doesn't, we shut it down quietly and nobody gets hurt. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Now get out of my office and build something worth building." I stood, saluted, and left. In the hallway outside, Lieutenant Avers was waiting. "Well, he approved it." She smiled, genuinely, without reservation. "Outstanding, ma'am. When do we start?" "Tomorrow." The first challenge was recruitment. I needed Marines who met 3 criteria: combat experience, service-connected injuries, and current medical clearance for limited duty. That last requirement was the hardest. Most wounded Marines were either fully cleared or medically retired, with very few in the gray area where Project Reaper operated. Gunnery Sergeant Corps made calls. Lieutenant Avers sent emails. Within 2 weeks, we had a list of 37 potential candidates across 3 bases. Of those, 12 were interested. Of those, 8 were actually eligible. Not a large pool, but it was a start. The first participant to sign on was a sergeant named Maria Ochoa, 29 years old, missing her right hand from an IED blast in Helmand Province. She'd been a motor transport operator before the injury and was currently assigned to administrative duties at Camp Lejeune. She hated it. "Ma'am, I've been pushing paper for 18 months, she said during our initial interview. "I'm not broken. I'm bored. If you're telling me there's a way back to real work, I'm in. This won't be easy, Sergeant." I didn't join the Corps because it was easy. I approved her application on the spot. The second was a corporal named James Wu, 26, partially deaf from repeated blast exposure during his deployment to Afghanistan. He'd been working in supply ever since, quietly competent but visibly frustrated with being sidelined. "I can still do the job, ma'am," he said. "I just need someone to give me a chance." "Then you'll have one." By the end of the first month, we had 6 Marines committed to the pilot program. 6 people who'd been told, in various ways, that their service was over, that their injuries disqualified them from meaningful work, that the best they could hope for was a quiet assignment until their contracts expired. We were about to prove everyone wrong. The second challenge was Captain Rhett Marlowe. He requested a meeting 2 weeks after Karan approved the project. I granted it because refusing would have looked like I was afraid of his objections. I wasn't. But I also wasn't naive enough to think he'd go quietly. He arrived at my office precisely on time, in dress uniform, looking every bit the professional officer. If I hadn't spent months watching him undermine the chain of command through charisma, I might have been fooled. "Colonel, I wanted to discuss Project Reaper." "Go ahead, Captain." He sat down without being invited. Small power play, establishing that he considered this a conversation between equals rather than a subordinate briefing a superior. "I think it's a good idea in principle," he said. "But I'm concerned about the optics." "Optics?" "Yes, ma'am. We're taking wounded Marines and putting them back into leadership positions. That sends a message, and we need to be careful what that message is." I set down my pen. "What message do you think it sends, Captain?" "That we're desperate. That we can't recruit enough able-bodied Marines to fill leadership roles, so we're resorting to using injured personnel. It could undermine confidence in the force." I let his words sit in the air for a moment. Not because I was considering them, they were absurd, but because I wanted him to hear them reflected back. "Captain Marlowe, are you suggesting that wounded Marines are inherently less capable than able-bodied ones?" "I'm suggesting that perception matters, ma'am." "Perception? You think the perception of our capabilities is more important than the actual capabilities of our Marines?" He shifted slightly. "I think both matter, ma'am." "Then let me clarify something for you. Project Reaper isn't about optics. It's about effectiveness. These Marines have combat experience, tactical knowledge, and leadership skills that are going to waste in administrative billets. We're not using them because we're desperate, we're using them because they're good at their jobs. With respect, ma'am, they're good at their jobs within certain limitations." "Stop." He stopped. I stood up. "Captain, I'm going to say this once. Every Marine in Project Reaper has been medically cleared for duty within their physical parameters. They've all demonstrated competence and commitment. And they've all sacrificed more for this Corps than you've ever been asked to. If you have a legitimate operational concern, I'll hear it. But if you're worried about optics, about image, about whether wounded Marines make the Corps look weak, then you fundamentally misunderstand what this organization is supposed to be." His jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to ensure the program succeeds." "No, Captain. You're trying to protect your own reputation by distancing yourself from anything that doesn't fit your image of what a Marine should look like. And that's not leadership, that's vanity." He stood. "Permission to be dismissed, ma'am." "Denied." "Sit down." He sat. "Captain Marlowe, you're a competent officer. You have good instincts, strong technical skills, and the ability to inspire loyalty. But you've turned leadership into performance art, and that's dangerous. The Marines under your command don't follow you because they understand the mission. They follow you because you make them feel good. And when you're not around, they don't know what to do." "Ma'am, I'm not finished. Project Reaper is happening with or without your support. But you're going to stop undermining it, stop questioning it, and stop spreading doubts about the capabilities of wounded Marines. If you can't do that, I'll recommend to General Karan that you be reassigned to a position where your opinions on the matter are irrelevant. Do you understand?" His face had gone pale. "Yes, ma'am." "Good." Dismissed. He left without another word. 3 weeks later, Major General Karan reassigned Captain Marlowe to a staff billet in logistics at Camp Pendleton, quietly, permanently, with a notation in his file that suggested future command assignments would require additional evaluation. It wasn't vindictive. It was necessary. By quarter's end, Project Reaper had 6 participants, a training facility at Camp Lejeune, and a mission to prove that sacrifice didn't mean obsolescence. And we were just getting started. Project Reaper launched at Camp Lejeune, then Quantico. Dozens of veterans returned, not broken, just underused. Voss applied to join. I let him. On the second day, he said quietly, "Ma'am, I was wrong." I didn't answer. Just handed him the training schedule. Then prove it. Within a year, he was leading his own team, fierce, disciplined, humble. Sometimes redemption doesn't need words. The first training cycle began on a Monday in March. 6 Marines stood in formation outside the Tactical Operations Center at Camp Lejeune, Sergeant Ochoa, Corporal Wu, and 4 others who'd arrived over the previous weeks. Each one had a different injury, a different story, a different reason for being there. But they all shared the same look, determination mixed with uncertainty, hope tempered by the knowledge that they'd been counted out before. I stood in front of them with Lieutenant Avers on my left and Gunnery Sergeant Corr on my right. "Good morning, Marines." "Good morning, ma'am," they answered in unison. "You're here because you've been told, in one way or another, that your service is limited. That your injuries disqualify you from meaningful work. That the best you can hope for is to finish your contracts quietly and move on. I'm here to tell you that's incorrect." I paused, let the words settle. Project Reaper exists to prove that combat experience and tactical knowledge don't disappear when you lose a limb or your hearing or your mobility. They're still there. They're still valuable. And this program is going to put them to use. Over the next 6 months, you'll participate in mission planning, tactical exercises, and leadership development. You'll work with active operational units. You'll be evaluated on the same standards as every other Marine in this Corps. And at the end, if you succeed, you'll have the option to return to operational billets. Sergeant Ochoa raised her hand. "Yes, Sergeant." "Ma'am, are we going to be treated differently because of our injuries?" "Yes and no. Your physical limitations will be accommodated. We're not going to ask Corporal Wu to conduct radio operations if his hearing impairment makes that ineffective. But your standards won't be lowered. If anything, they'll be higher. You're representing every wounded Marine who's been sidelined, and you need to prove that faith in you is justified." She nodded. "Understood, ma'am." "Any other questions?" Silence. "Good. Gunnery Sergeant Corr will brief you on this week's schedule." Dismissed. They broke formation, and Corr took over. I watched them for a moment. The way they carried themselves, the way they interacted with each other, the cautious optimism in their movements. They wanted this. They needed this. I just had to make sure we didn't let them down. The first month was brutal. Not because the training was harder than expected, but because we were still figuring out how to adapt standard curricula to Marines with physical limitations. Sergeant Ochoa struggled with weapons manipulation drills until we modified the equipment. Corporal Wu missed critical audio cues during tactical exercises until we integrated visual signals. A lance corporal named Peters, who'd lost significant mobility in his left shoulder, couldn't perform standard combat lifts until we redesigned the technique. Every problem had a solution. But finding those solutions took time, patience, and a willingness to accept that the way we've always done it wasn't going to work. Lieutenant Avers handled most of the logistical adjustments. She was tireless, staying late, arriving early, constantly iterating on training plans to find what worked. By week 3, she'd created a modified tactical manual specifically for Project Reaper participants. By week 5, she'd convinced 3 active duty units to integrate our Marines into their training exercises. "How are you doing this?" I asked her one evening after she'd coordinated a joint exercise with 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines. "Doing what, ma'am?" "Convincing skeptical officers to let wounded Marines train with their units." She smiled. "I tell them the truth, that these Marines have more combat experience than half their junior officers, that they're medically cleared for duty, and that if they're too scared to integrate them into a training exercise, they probably shouldn't be leading Marines in the first place." That works. About 60% of the time. The other 40%, I mentioned that you and General Karan are personally invested in the program's success, and suddenly they find time in their schedules. I laughed to spite myself. "Remind me never to underestimate you, Lieutenant." "I'll do my best, ma'am." By the end of the first month, word had spread. Not just at Lejeune, but throughout the Marine Corps. Officers I'd never met were calling to ask about the program. Wounded Marines were submitting applications. Medical personnel were reaching out to offer support. And then Calder Voss applied. His application came through official channels, submitted to Lieutenant Avers, who brought it to me without comment. Just placed it on my desk and waited. I read it twice. The paperwork was perfect, properly formatted, thoroughly documented, professionally written. His service record was attached, 3 deployments, multiple commendations, solid performance reviews until the Article 15 4 months earlier. The demotion from staff sergeant to corporal was noted, along with the reason, disrespecting a superior officer. There was also a personal statement. 1 paragraph, handwritten. I request permission to join Project Reaper because I need to understand what I mocked. I disrespected Colonel Kane and everything she represents, and I cannot undo that. But I can learn from it. I can become a better Marine. And I can prove that redemption is possible, even for those who don't deserve it. I set the paper down and looked at Lieutenant Avers. Thoughts? He's sincere, ma'am. I spoke with him before he submitted the application. He's been different since the Article 15, quieter, more focused, less interested in performing for his peers. Gunnery Sergeant Corps says his work has improved significantly. That doesn't erase what he did. No, ma'am. But it might mean he's learned from it. I considered the application for a long moment. Every instinct told me to reject it. Voss had mocked me, humiliated me, reduced my sacrifice to a punchline. Letting him into Project Reaper felt like rewarding bad behavior. But Project Reaper wasn't about my feelings. It was about proving that Marines could change, could grow, could become better than they were. And if I believed that about wounded Marines, I had to believe it about Voss too. Accept his application, I said. But make it clear that he's on probation. One mistake, one hint of disrespect toward any participant or staff member, and he's out. No second chances. Yes, ma'am. Voss reported for training on a Monday morning 2 weeks later. He stood at attention in front of my desk, eyes forward, jaw tight. Corporal Voss. Ma'am. You understand why you're here? Yes, ma'am. Tell me. He swallowed. I'm here because I failed as a Marine. I disrespected you, I disrespected the Corps, and I disrespected every service member who's been wounded in combat. I'm here to learn, to change, and to prove that I can be better than I was. And if you can't? Then I'll accept whatever consequences follow, ma'am. I studied him for a moment. He looked different than he had 4 months ago, leaner, harder, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting yourself. The arrogance was gone. What remained was humility and something that looked like genuine remorse. You'll be working directly with Sergeant Ochoa, I said. She's leading a team exercise next week, and you'll be her second in command. You'll follow her orders, support her decisions, and treat her with the respect she's earned. If she reports any issues, you're done. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Good. Report to Gunnery Sergeant Corps for your assignment. Dismissed. He saluted, turned, and left. On the second day of training, Voss approached me during a break. The other Marines were reviewing tactical maps in the operations center. He stood at attention until I acknowledged him. Ma'am, I was wrong. The words hung in the air between us. Simple. Direct. Insufficient to undo the damage, but honest enough to matter. I didn't answer immediately. Just looked at him, at the Marine who'd mocked me, who'd called me paper brass, who'd made a joke out of my sacrifice. He looked back, not flinching, not making excuses. Finally, I picked up the training schedule from the table beside me and handed it to him. Then prove it. He took the schedule, saluted, and returned to his team. Over the following weeks, Voss changed. Not dramatically, there was no sudden transformation, no moment of enlightenment. Just a steady, deliberate shift in how he carried himself. He listened more than he spoke. He deferred to Sergeant Ochoa's judgment without hesitation. He worked harder than anyone else, arrived earlier, stayed later, and never once complained. Sergeant Ochoa noticed. Ma'am, Corporal Voss is doing well, she reported during our weekly check-in. He's reliable, respectful, and he's actually helping the team improve. Whatever he was before, he's not that anymore. You trust him? She considered the question carefully. I trust that he's trying, ma'am. Whether that becomes trust in him as a person, we'll see. That was good enough. By the end of the training cycle, Voss had become one of the program's strongest participants. He led missions with precision, adapted to challenges without complaint, and earned the respect of Marines who had every reason to hate him. When Sergeant Ochoa recommended him for team leader certification, I approved it without hesitation. Within a year, he was leading his own team, fierce, disciplined, humble. He didn't talk about the bar incident. He didn't apologize again. He just worked, constantly, to be better than he'd been. Sometimes redemption doesn't need words. Sometimes it just needs time and the willingness to change. On the anniversary of Project Reaper's launch, I stood in front of 23 Marines, the original 6 participants plus 17 who joined over the following months. They'd completed the program. They'd proven themselves. And they were ready to return to operational billets. "You came here wounded," I said. "You're leaving here whole. Not because your injuries disappeared, but because you proved that injury doesn't define capability. You are Marines, full stop. No qualifications, no limitations, no asterisks. And every unit you join from this point forward will be better, because you're in it." They stood at attention, proud and fierce and unbreakable. In the back row, Corporal Voss stood beside Sergeant Ochoa. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just stood there, a Marine among Marines, finally understanding what that meant. When General Caron retired, he mentioned me in his farewell address. Some Marines lead by command. Others by the miles they've walked, prosthetic or not. The men who'd once mocked me stood in the crowd, saluting. I returned it, no emotion on my face, only precision. Trust rebuilt isn't forgiveness, it's clarity. The ceremony took place on a Friday afternoon in late September. The parade deck at Camp Pendleton was packed, over 2,000 Marines in formation, dressed blues sharp under the California sun. Major General Silas Caron stood at the podium, flanked by flags, preparing to hand over command of I Marine Expeditionary Force after 35 years of service. I sat in the front row with the other senior officers, watching a man I respected more than almost anyone prepare to say goodbye to the only life he'd ever known. His speech was classic Caron, direct, thoughtful, occasionally funny, always honest. He talked about his first deployment, about the Marines he'd lost, about the lessons he'd learned. He thanked his wife, his children, his staff. He acknowledged the challenges facing the Corps and expressed confidence that the next generation would meet them. Then, near the end, he shifted his attention to the officers seated before him. Leadership takes many forms, he said. Some Marines lead through presence. They walk into a room and everyone straightens up. Some lead through expertise. They know the answer before you finish asking the question. Some lead through charisma. They make you want to follow them even when you don't know where you're going. He paused, scanning the crowd. But the Marines I respect most are the ones who lead through example. Who show us what's possible when we refuse to accept limitations. Who prove that sacrifice doesn't mean the end of service. It means the beginning of something harder and more important. His eyes found mine. Some Marines lead by command. Others by the miles they've walked, prosthetic or not. The crowd was silent. I felt 2,000 pairs of eyes shift toward me. I kept my face neutral, my posture perfect, my breathing steady. This wasn't about me. It was about every Marine who'd been told they were finished and had refused to believe it. Caron continued speaking, moving on to other topics, but the moment hung in the air. When the ceremony ended and the formation dismissed, I was immediately surrounded by officers offering congratulations, respect, acknowledgement. I accepted them professionally, briefly, then extracted myself and headed toward my car. Gunnery Sergeant Corr intercepted me halfway across the parking lot. That was something, ma'am. It was a retirement ceremony, Gunny. It was more than that. He walked beside me, matching my pace. The general could have mentioned a dozen officers in that speech. He chose you. That means something. It means he's a good man who values the work we've done. It means you've changed the Corps, ma'am. Whether you want to admit it or not. I stopped walking and looked at him. Corr was 38 now, graying at the temples, with the kind of weathered face that comes from 2 decades of service. He'd been at Helix Point. He'd carried me to the medevac. He'd watched me rebuild myself from scratch. I haven't changed anything, Gunny. I just did my job. Your job was being a lieutenant colonel. You didn't have to create Project Reaper. You didn't have to fight for wounded Marines. You didn't have to prove anything to anyone. But you did. And now there are 23 Marines back in operational billets who would have been sidelined without you. That's change, ma'am. I didn't have a response to that. So I just nodded and continued toward my car. The reception was held at the Officers' Club, a formal affair with speeches, toasts, and the kind of forced mingling that makes every military social event feel slightly awkward. I stayed for an hour, shook hands with people I barely knew, and was preparing to leave when I noticed 3 Marines standing near the back of the room. Corporal Voss, Corporal Hayes, and Corporal Dennison. All 3 in dress blues. All 3 watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read. I considered ignoring them. I considered leaving through the side door. Instead, I walked directly toward them. They snapped to attention as I approached. At ease. They relaxed slightly, but the tension remained. Hayes looked nervous. Dennison looked guilty. Voss looked different. Serious. Composed. Like someone who'd spent the last year learning hard lessons. Corporals, I said. Ma'am, they replied in unison. You're here for the general's retirement? Yes, ma'am, Voss said. We requested permission to attend. He granted it. I studied them for a moment. 18 months had passed since the bar incident. Hayes and Dennison had completed their punishment, returned to duty, and by all accounts were performing well. Voss had finished Project Reaper and was now leading a training team at Lejeune. They'd changed. Whether that change was permanent remained to be seen. The general's a good man, I said. He deserves to be honored. Yes, ma'am, Voss said. Then, after a brief hesitation, ma'am, permission to speak? Granted. I wanted to thank you. For letting me into Project Reaper. For giving me a chance I didn't deserve. I know words don't fix what I did, but I want you to know that I'm different now. Better. Because of what you taught me. Hayes and Dennison nodded in agreement. I looked at the 3 of them young Marines who'd made a mistake, paid for it, and were trying to move forward. Part of me wanted to tell them that their gratitude didn't matter, that their redemption was their own responsibility, that I didn't need or want their thanks. But that would have been dishonest. Their change did matter. Their growth was the entire point of what we'd built. You're welcome, Corporal Voss. Just keep proving it. Yes, ma'am. I started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. And Corporals Hayes and Dennison, your record shows solid performance since the incident. Keep that up. The Corps needs good Marines. They both stood a little straighter. Yes, ma'am. I left the reception shortly after, drove home, and sat on my porch with a glass of water and the California sunset. My prosthetic ached, it always did after long ceremonies, but it was manageable. Everything was manageable now. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Saw the video of Karan's speech. I'm proud of you. I typed back, just doing my job. Her response came immediately. Your father would have been proud too. I stared at the message for a long time. My father had been dead for 15 years. I'd spent most of that time trying to live up to what I thought he would have wanted: discipline, excellence, unwavering commitment. But I'd never been sure if I'd succeeded. Maybe I'd finally started to. The following Monday, I received orders for a new assignment. Colonel Kayla Drake-Kane, promoted to 06, commanding Task Group Phantom, a joint unit responsible for integrating combat veterans back into field command. Project Reaper expanded. Institutionalized. Made permanent. Lieutenant Avers knocked on my door at 0800. You've seen the orders, ma'am? Yes. Congratulations, Colonel. The promotion had come through faster than expected. 06 at 41 was rare but not unprecedented. I'd earned it through performance, through results, through 23 years of service that had cost me more than most people would ever understand. Thank you, Lieutenant. I assume you've received orders as well. She smiled. Captain Avers, ma'am. And yes, I'm assigned to Task Group Phantom as your operations officer. Outstanding. We have a lot of work to do. Yes, ma'am. When do we start? I looked at the stack of files on my desk, requests from wounded Marines across the Corps, all of them asking for a chance, all of them ready to prove that they still had value. Immediately. Over the next 6 months, Task Group Phantom grew from a pilot program to a permanent command structure. We established training centers at 3 bases. We partnered with medical personnel to create better evaluation criteria. We placed 87 Marines back into operational billets. And we proved, definitively, that sacrifice doesn't mean obsolescence. Gunnery Sergeant Corps was promoted to Master Sergeant and became the senior enlisted advisor for Task Group Phantom. Sergeant Ochoa earned her commission and became a second lieutenant. Corporal Voss made sergeant again, then staff sergeant, then led one of the most successful training teams in the program's history. The Marines who'd once mocked me now served under the standards I'd established. Some of them thrived. Some of them struggled. All of them learned that respect isn't given, it's earned, maintained, and rebuilt through constant effort. Trust rebuilt isn't forgiveness. It's clarity. It's understanding that people can change, that mistakes don't define potential, that the gap between who we are and who we could be is bridged by action, not apology. On the 1-year anniversary of my promotion, I stood in formation as over 300 Marines passed in review. Wounded veterans, active duty personnel, officers, and enlisted working together toward a shared mission. In the front row, I saw Voss. Beside him, Ochoa. Behind them, dozens of Marines who'd been told they were finished and had proven everyone wrong. I saluted them. They saluted back. No emotion on my face. Only precision. Because that's what Marines do. We endure. We adapt. We rebuild. And we never, ever quit. That's how it went down. Respect wasn't handed to me, it was earned twice. If this hit home, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been mocked, underestimated, or dismissed because of something visible or invisible? What happened? When you were disrespected in public, how did you respond? Stand your ground, walk away, or escalate? Do you believe in redemption for people like Voss? What would earning it look like to you? If you serve or have served, what does real leadership look like in your unit? Drop your answers in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Your story might help someone else stand up too.